I'm Danielle Peterson from Infrastructure News. Today we're talking to David Metelerkamp from Industry Insight about the economic trends in the built environment. This is CPD On Demand. David, can you please tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi there. So I am a macroeconomist specializing in the construction sector from a consulting company in Cape Town that specifically focuses on providing business intelligence services to stakeholders in the construction industry.
Okay, so David, what is your view on the performance of the South African economy in 2016?
So 2016 was one of the worst years that the South African economy has had to undergo since the global financial crisis that hit us late 2009, 2010. The data came out yesterday from StatsSA, and it looks like the economy grew only 0.3% in 2016, considerably below many economists and global institutions' growth projections at the beginning of 2016. It was largely due to global factors. The primary and secondary industries of the economy really suffered. The mining industry had a terrible year. Manufacturing industry was one of the big reasons for the downturn, for example. Of course, the drought played a big role. Agricultural sector really performed exceptionally badly in late 2015 and early the whole of 2016, really. We are sort of seeing a bit of a recovery there to a degree, but overall, a really bad year for the South African economy.
Okay, and then in terms of the economy, can we perhaps drill down a bit into civil and building?
Okay, so the civil construction environment is a lot more driven by government spending. About 80% or so of all civil projects is government funded. On the building side, this is a lot more privately driven. If you're looking at residential, non-residential sort of construction. So whereas the civil industry will be more driven by overall government spending, the building industry will be driven overall more by just general factors in the economy. So generally speaking, the two sectors didn't really perform much differently. We've seen a big consolidation of the government's budget over the last 2 to 3 years or so in terms of reining in spending. And unfortunately, infrastructure spending had to take a degree of a hit there. This is, due to the government having to be a little bit more responsible about keeping the rating agencies off their backs to sort of just rein in government spending and debt. So this took a bit of a toll on the civil environment, definitely. As we saw, so according to our statistics at Industry Insight, there was very moderate growth in the value of civil projects that have been awarded in 2016. There was only a 6.2% nominal increase, which translates to roughly more or less zero growth in the civil environment. Tendering, not as positive, even in real terms. In real terms, tendering was down by about 8% in terms of civils. And if you look at government spending over the last year or so, depending on different sectors, spending was about, last year, in the last budget, was supposed to be 1.8% increase in nominal terms in total infrastructure spending. So there's a nailing down too much on the civil environment, whereas the building environment was more driven by the overall downturn in the economy. So the economy only grew by 0.3%. This meant that the residential and non-residential markets suffered as well, with a bit more of a lagged effect. So we're actually only going to see this down. So I'm hoping, or it's my estimation, that this 0.3% should be the worst year since the financial crisis. We're expecting a slight pickup in the global economy as well as the local economy next year to a degree. But this is still going to impact the building industry negatively in the short term, with a bit of a lagged effect. So we're still going to see a bit of pain in the next 6 months or so in the building industry.
Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan recently gave his budget speech for this year. So can you tell us a bit about the allocations for the medium term? Okay,
so in terms of infrastructure spending specifically for the next 3 years or so, it's actually increased this year compared to last year, for the 3-year period. We're expecting a 4%, or according to Treasury, there's going to be a 4% nominal increase in total infrastructure spending over the next 3 years. In real terms, this is of course still negative, definitely below inflation, but this is actually up from last year, which was 1.8%. And then in terms of the allocations, so energy, water and sanitation and transport and logistics, they're the 3 biggest spending categories for the civil sector. And some good news is that transport and logistics, which is mainly construction of roads, rehabilitation of roads, etc., that SANRAL and PRAS's budget included there, that's actually going to see an 8.9% nominal increase over the 3-year period, which is definitely positive given the overall maybe more grim outlook from infrastructure spending for the budget, even though it's slightly better than last year, but in real terms still negative. But then to break that down, that's a very nice increase in 2017 of a 14.4% increase in infrastructure spending on transport and logistics in nominal terms. But then this is however followed by a 1.1% increase in nominal terms in the following year. So it just depends how government breaks it up per year, but overall it's going to be an 8.9% increase for transport and logistics. Water and sanitation, over the 3-year period, that's going to be a 6.5% increase in new water infrastructure and mainly upgrading old water and sanitation sort of infrastructure. And that's only going to be 5.6% and 4.7% increases respectively in 2017 and 2018. So a little bit below inflation. Energy, that's a lot more negative than the other two sectors. That's going to be seeing a negative 0.1% decline in nominal terms in infrastructure spending for energy. So this is mainly because Medupe and Kusile power plants are coming to an end. And it doesn't seem like there's any other major energy projects in the pipeline. We were expecting some nuclear maybe in the budget, but it seems, according to the government's, and according to the document, that there isn't any funding for any nuclear sort of spending.
So does that then spell more positive times ahead in general? Can contractors look forward to better results themselves?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'll say that it's a bit more fragmented. If you're a contractor, for example, that deals more with roads, for example, you could have a slightly better next 3 years than a contractor who deals more with water and sanitation or power, for example. So it's a bit more fragmented. And in real terms, overall, it's still negative. So we're going to see more of the same from this year, more or less. Slightly better maybe, but probably not. More flat, stagnant environment. So I mean, that's civils. Building is obviously more driven by the private sector and rely more on status A's data there on building plans passed, the square meters thereof, to give us an indication of that.
Okay, and is that looking more positive?
Not quite. So in terms of breaking the different markets up, the residential market plays a slightly bigger role than the non-residential market. And then the way that Status A breaks it up is into dwellings smaller than 80 square meters, which is more low-cost housing. There we've only seen growth of it's about 15% growth over the last 12 months in the average number of square meters that have been approved. So, oh no, that's wrong as well. Low-cost housing. Beg your pardon, we've seen a growth of 15% in the number of square meters approved of flats and townhouses. So this is the category that's showing good growth over all the provinces throughout South Africa. Western Cape, Gauteng specifically. In sort of tougher economic times, people tend to, instead of buying a bigger freestanding house, it's more affordable to buy sort of a house in a complex. It's also more affordable to maintain, for example. Overall, the residential market is looking more negative. With the luxury, we call it luxury homes. It's the dwellings greater than 80 square meters and low-cost housing, negative growth, negative real growth in the square meterage approved over the last 12 months or so.
David, what are the current global economic trends and how does that affect our own economy?
Okay, so many economists are predicting a slight pickup in the global economy in 2017. 2016, like the South African economy, was a really bad year for some other economies throughout the world. Advanced economies are expected to pick up slightly, but some of the bigger factors are that we've seen a slight increase in commodity prices. The oil price, for example, is hovering around $55 a barrel now, for example. And a lot of economies are really dependent on exporting these commodities, especially emerging markets. So with the oil price rebounding to a degree, with OPEC agreeing to cut production also to a degree, this is leading to renewed optimism for economies such as Nigeria. They've had a really raw deal over the last year and a half. Don't remember the number offhand, but a good third of the Nigerian economy is dependent on oil exports, for example. So they're coming out of recession, hopefully, in 2017. That's going to be a big boost. Other emerging markets, Brazil is coming out of a really bad recession, Russia as well. The economy's contracted by over 3% for 2 consecutive years in 2015 and 2016. So just the fact that they're coming up from that downturn, that's going to be a big plus for the global economy and the whole economic cycle. Another positive factor is there's renewed optimism around the growth of China, the growth of the Chinese economy. There are some statistics that indicate, so China is going through a rebalance of their economy from a very much manufacturing export-driven growth model, which has worked extremely well for them in the past, growing at an excess of 10% pre-financial crisis. So they're trying to rebalance the economy to have more of a greater consumption element going forward, to sort of diversify the economy a bit more. It's not healthy when the economy relies only on one thing, for example, like Nigeria's economy. If the oil price stagnates again or declines, the Nigerian economy again is in very big trouble. So it's not healthy for one economy to rely only on one big export, for example. So the Chinese economy picking up, that's very good for South Africa, for example. And when we say picking up, it's very moderate. I mean, this is growth of 6.5% expected instead of 6.2%, I think, according to the IMF, for example. But the sheer size of the Chinese economy, that means that has quite a big knock-on effect to the trading partners of China. South Africa is one of the big trading partners of China. I think China imports something like 66% or 68% of all of our iron ore that we produce. So for the Chinese economy to pick up to just a little bit better than expected is definitely good for the South African economy. On the more advanced economies, it's a bit more uncertain. We've seen this populist wave over Europe and the United States with the Brexit vote, Trump being elected. We see there's a far-right candidate that's doing relatively well in the French election now, Marine Le Pen, and a few other European countries are having their own populist movements. It's my opinion and most economists' opinion that this is more bad for the world than good. There's been a consensus in the economic literature for years. One thing that economists actually agree upon is that free trade is good for everyone. Obviously, it depends on certain factors, but it's very much been a fear-mongering driven campaign. So we've already seen the US withdraw from the Trans-Pacific, or was it NAFTA? There was a Trans-Pacific trade partnership, for example, which is going to have a negative effect. There's this notion that that local jobs are being lost to foreign jobs because we trade, and the reality is that if you're closing off trade or you're closing off borders, you're losing out on huge export markets that are huge job creators locally, for example. So there's big question marks around the US economy. No one knows what to expect. It's impossible. So Donald Trump wants to decrease taxes, corporate taxes and income taxes, and at the same time invest more than $1 trillion in infrastructure, for example, and not cut any entitlements. This is just absolutely impossible. America have skyrocketing debt, for example, and it's just so ironic that the Republicans are the ones who've always been the debt-conscious party. They're now backing this, very irresponsible policy. But I'm not sure it will get through Congress. In terms of the whole Brexit debate, this is looking like it's going to be a very long and drawn-out process. So there are some uncertainties there, and just in general, there are in the advanced economies, there are very high risk factors or very pertinent risks, mainly geopolitical, that do sort of give sort of more negative outlook to advanced economies. But we are expecting to see a pickup in the US economy, for example. Some of these Trumpian short-term policies will definitely boost growth in the short term. What the long-term impact, that's sort of more serious questions.
And can you comment in terms of where South Africa is performing in terms of civils and the building environment? How do we compare to other countries, be it emerging economies or more developed economies?
Well, most countries went about, so there was a financial crisis in 2008, and the government in many emerging markets play a counter-cyclical role in terms of when there's a downswing in the economy, they would generally like to invest in infrastructure in that downswing, as it's a very short-term job creator, for example, and a good growth booster in the short term. So I think what's happened in many emerging markets and advanced economies to a degree is that the governments have run out of what economists call fiscal space. They've spent up, they've racked up their debt over the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years even, and it's coming to more unsustainable levels, for example. So in South Africa, we are at this point now. So to keep the rating agencies off our back, our government has responsibly consolidated our budget to some degree. Infrastructure spending has taken a bit of a cut there, To a degree, this has happened in other emerging markets as well.
You mentioned that growth in energy is going to be quite small in terms of spending, and we've heard a lot of drama surrounding Eskom and the signing of agreements with independent power producers. So maybe you can comment on that and where you think things are going?
Yes, absolutely. So we're only expecting, as I mentioned, we're expecting negative nominal growth in energy spending with no major energy plans tailored for government. So if this could be supplemented with these independent power producer procurement windows, that would significantly be a very positive factor going forward for the next, in terms of construction for the next 5 years or so, but in terms of the sort of supply side capacity of the overall economy, it would be very good for in general for the long term. So if Eskom can follow through with government's request for them to sign these independent power producers and to connect them to the grid, this will be a considerable step forward and will be positive for the construction sector and the economy as a whole, certainly.
And that also plays into, there's a lot of discussion around public-private partnerships and the private sector getting involved to help fund the projects. Do you think that's a very important step to make going forward?
Well, it is an extremely important step going forward, but the reality of it is that the private sector doesn't really want to do business with governments. It's an unfortunate reality that the government is going to have to face and they're going to have to address it. There are massive inefficiencies around these public-private partnerships, and at the end of the day, the private sector is keen to a degree, but then all the red tape and all the sort of inefficiencies that they have to deal with, it's really put a lot of the private sector off. And this also speaks to the general economic environment. There's just a lack of business confidence at the moment. So there isn't a great deal of investors or businesses that are willing to invest in the South African economy in the first place, let alone buddy up with government, for example.
And in terms of the allocations for spending on infrastructure, how is that money being spent?
So if you look at, depending on the category, so it's either a good or bad thing depending on your opinion, but a very high proportion of the overall spending in roads, for example, this is not new roads. Maybe 20%, 25% of that spending on transport and logistics infrastructure goes to new infrastructure. The rest of it is just refurbishing and rehabilitating current roads, which again is a good thing in a way, because some of our roads are in serious needs of refurbishment, for example. If you look at water and sanitation as well, a big issue was that we had a very highly decaying water infrastructure, which is a big reason why we're having such issues on the waterfront, for example. So I think the government has to a degree realised that refurbishment and rehabilitation is definitely important, but I think contractors and stakeholders in the industry should also realise that all this money being spent by government, and a lot of it is definitely for refurbishments. This is the same in schools and hospitals, all the way through the list of general infrastructure spending.
And I don't know whether you can comment on, is that what we need? Do we need to be spending our budgets on refurbishment, or do we also need to be spending a lot more money on new projects?
Well, I think that's more a matter of opinion. To a large degree, a lot of our infrastructure has been neglected over the last 10 years or so. Roads, water, schools, hospitals. I think in the past, the government has been caught out spending too much on new infrastructure and not maintaining the current infrastructure we have. So in my opinion, I think it is, for the overall long-term view of infrastructure and the economy, it is definitely a much better thing that the government is focusing more on rehabilitation and refurbishment. In
terms of government spending and budget allocations, what are some of the problems and challenges that you see arising there?
Well, some of the major challenges we've noticed from our data is that there's becoming an increasing disconnect between the number of projects that are going out to tender and the actual number of projects that are awarded at the end of the day. So we assume that this is largely due to the slow pace of rollout of projects from state-owned entities especially. There are massive inefficiencies in some of the bigger state-owned enterprises, and the rollout of projects has been a lot slower than it should have been. It should have been a lot quicker. It also has a lot to do with the lack of security related to finance in terms of the state-owned entities. They largely have to finance a lot of their own spending through tariffs, of course, via consumers. So, for example, 2016 was such a bad year for the economy that Eskom couldn't afford to put up their tariffs, for example. So this led to less spending thereof, if that makes sense. Some of the other challenges are just general business confidence issues. It relates to the overall outlook of the domestic economy and sort of general economic factors that are really at all-time lows to a large degree.
And we've heard a lot of complaints about payments to contractors and government not paying. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure, this remains still one of the biggest issues, definitely in the civil and the building environments. Often some contractors just don't have the cash flow to wait more than 90 days, even 120 days in some examples, to be paid for their services. And sometimes this is a big reason why some projects are postponed, put on hold, because some of the smaller contractors, for example, just don't have the cash flow to continue with the projects when they aren't receiving their constant payments, for example. So it's definitely a big problem. Less so in some provinces. Western Cape, for example, is a lot better than the rest of the country. Gauteng is also pretty good. If you look at this indicator where you look at the number of outstanding payments over 90 days, I think there's an indicator that's available from StatsSA. But some of the other provinces are, in total infrastructure bills, some of them are between 60 and 80% of the payments are later than 90 days, for example. It's definitely a big problem.
And does that have a greater impact on the economy when projects are delayed and not able to be completed?
Definitely. So it just slows everything down. It puts projects on hold. Maybe it happens that projects actually get cancelled at the end of the day. It's massive inefficiency just leads to really stagnant growth in the construction sector. I mean, if government to a degree and the state-owned entities and everything went a lot smoother, we could be looking at above inflation growth, but it's actually getting down to spending these amounts that they say they're going to spend that really becomes a big issue. It seems funny to think that you can't spend 900 and something billion rand, but it's of course a very difficult and long drawn out process.
And we often hear when it comes to the end of the financial year that departments haven't spent their whole budgets. So is there not enough emphasis on spending money?
Definitely. So I think at the end of the day, it comes down to inefficiencies on all levels: provincial level, municipal level, national level, state-owned entities especially.
Okay, another very hot topic at the moment is transformation. Can you tell us how that plays a role?
Well, what I can say is that the construction sector certainly hasn't transformed at the rate that the government would have liked. It's obviously it's a very difficult thing to get right, with sort of, I want to avoid the words white monopoly capital, but it's a sort of very difficult process to come out of, this whole sort of systemic inequality. And the government would definitely like to see the construction sector and the CLAB transformed at a far greater rate than it currently is. There has definitely been growth though in the lower grade contractors, and I think the deal that the big contractors involved in all the collusion around the World Cup stadiums, the deals that they've come with the government is definitely going to help transformation calls, for sure.
And in terms of those payments that they've now agreed to make, do you see that having an impact maybe on the sector itself in terms of promoting training and skills growth?
No, I think overall it's a very positive outcome from the whole debacle. The bigger contractors have said that they are going to be involved in extensive skills development over the next few years for their few emerging black contractors that they've picked to solve portions of their company to or give work to. So I think it's a definite step in the right direction.
Okay, and then looking forward, what is your forecast?
Well, for the civil sector, we rely relatively highly on infrastructure spending. So we look at infrastructure spending over the next few years, whereas the building sector, it's more driven by the overall economy, right? So civil sector, we're looking at flat but slightly negative growth. So let's say growth of between -2% and -3% in real terms over the next 2 years. And the building sector, residential, non-residential, very similar. It's of my opinion that the residential, non-residential, or the overall building sector, the overall impact of the economy on the sector is a bit lagged. whereas the civil sector is more driven by overall government spending. So I think we're still going to see some of the lows that we're still experiencing now in the first and second quarters of 2017 in the residential and non-residential sector. So we're also expecting very low growth of -2%, -3% on average for the residential and non-residential sector in 2017. But I should also mention this is on a national scale. If you look provincially at the different segments within each residential, non-residential market, even some civil things, that there is definitely growth areas in different provinces, in different maybe metropolitan areas, for example. Western Cape, for example, is doing their residential market, looks poised to have a relatively good year. With the shift from all these luxury homes to more flats and townhouses, Gauteng as well, for example. We see the big property, in the last year and a half, we've seen the listing of residential-only property funds, such as Bowen, Inglewood Place. I think Octodec now also has a proportion of their portfolio that's residential. So there definitely are still nodes of growth, but overall it's looking relatively stagnant, with low growth in real terms. And this is mainly based on the data that we get from Stats SA on the number of boarding plans, the square meters of boarding plans passed, as well as our own data, which we also have on non-residential construction.
Well, David, thank you so much for your insights and your expertise on economics and construction. This has been CPD On Demand, brought to you by Infrastructure News.